Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today we have Sierra Fan. Sierra Fan I'm a big fan of Sierra Fan, and she has this company called Illu, and Illu has an app. And rather than myself explaining the app, we're going to let Sierra Fan explain the app, and also just some background on Sierra too. She grew up in Silicon Valley, and she lives in a climate house where everybody is working on some kind of climate startup. So we could talk to her more about that. And then she went to this really fancy high school. And my girlfriend was really impressed when we all met at the NorCal Solar 50th anniversary party. And then Sierra was like, well, I did go to Harvard too, but I think it's the high school that makes her extra special. So we'll ask her about that. So, hey, Sierra, welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
Yeah, it's great to have you just sitting there over on the other side of the bay and all that kind of stuff. And we'll just maybe start from the beginning. Did you go to a special kindergarten?
I actually did. Oh my gosh. It's going to take a long time going through my educational history. But yeah, I actually was born in Beijing and lived there until I was 9. But I
Well, you
got,
don't have an accent.
yeah, well, I think that's part of that was because of this special kindergarten. My parents sent me to a bilingual boarding preschool and kindergarten that did all the fancy things. Like we went backpacking, we learned how to ice skate. It was like very hippie and everything. And it was a great experience. And I think probably that's also why I speak English and didn't really have that much trouble picking that up. But yeah, we never talked about that, but I guess it goes
So
way
you went
back.
to a hippie kindergarten in Beijing.
I
Did
did.
you guys do tie-dyes and all that kind of stuff?
No tie dyes, but if you think about Beijing education, it was all like tests and being very serious and curricula. And we were not like that. We were telling each other stories and putting on dance rehearsals. But it did, also taught us math and language. And I think I learned to read quite early from that as well, which was great.
So hippies have kind of been accused of being communist sometimes, like back in the day, McCarthy, all that kind of stuff. Well, I don't know if hippies were around when we had McCarthyism, but I don't know, maybe there's some kind of connection there. Socialism, communes, living on the commune, that sounds kind of hippie. So did you live on a commune? They probably don't have communes in Beijing, though.
Not actual communes anymore. They have campuses. And I did kind of grow up. There's like these different campuses where my mother's side of the family were all involved in agricultural research. And so there's a big agricultural research campus that had all the apartments in it and the offices, and it has its own restaurants, and you just own like mini city almost. And I spent a lot of time growing up there. So yeah.
And so did you learn the word solar over there when you were 9 years old?
I don't think I did, but I do remember getting very into sustainability and environmentalism
Huh.
back, I think this is probably first grade. So when I was 6 or so, I actually remember learning about the ozone hole and the refrigerants and all the issues there. And I come back home after school and I go talk to my parents. I'm like, we need to get rid of our fridge. It's bad. It's destroying the earth. So I think I got all of my passion about saving the earth and being environmentally friendly quite young.
Yeah, and I know that the air was pretty bad there in Beijing when I first went there. It might have been around that same time
Hmm.
because I'm older than you are, obviously. But yeah, it was like the air over at People's Square, Tiananmen Square, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
That it was just hard to see, and everybody was wearing masks without COVID.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy. I think the AQI, kind of the air quality metrics got up to 400, 500, which is crazy. Anything above 100, usually here in the Bay Area, it's like 8, anything above 100 is pretty bad. And in Beijing, I remember for some years in the winters, it would be in the hundreds and hundreds, which is like smoking a pack of cigarettes, just being outside.
Yeah, not good for 9-year-olds, probably.
Not good at all. Yeah, they've done a good job. China has overall done such a good job of building out so much solar, so much wind, so much clean energy. So it's gotten much better in the recent years, but especially when I was growing up, it was such a big issue.
One of the good things about it, though, is you don't really need eclipse glasses because you can look straight at the sun and you can see that it's a perfect circle. And so if the moon got in the way, you would be able to see that eclipse right at noon.
Yeah, exactly. No one ever got sunburned. You have the UV protection right there.
Yeah, that would prevent the skin cancer, sacrificing the lungs a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
That's another thing too, is sometimes people say, oh, we should talk about pollution instead of climate because there's a lot of climate change deniers in the United States.
Mhm.
So there you have it. Everybody wants to be able to breathe, I think.
Yeah, and it's so correlated. Actually, my research, so I studied economics and environmental science in undergrad, and my undergrad thesis was actually about how economic policies, government policies that are against pollution and end up helping on the carbon side and also vice versa. Carbon taxes and kind of carbon abatement policies also drastically help with pollution. So I was actually mostly very relevant to what we've just been talking about, running different kind of models and scenarios on China and say what our policies were, really trying to avoid the NOx and also the sulfur dioxide emissions, so acid rain pollution emissions. How much would that help with carbon emissions and vice versa? And it's so closely correlated that because it all kind of comes from the same thing, right? A lot of it is power plants, it's from gas vehicles, and so it's not really a debate. I think a lot of that is a cop out of the climate deniers being like, we're not focusing on the right things. We should be focusing on pollution and not carbon. And really, they're being caused by the same kind of problematic activities that we should try to reduce.
And so I'm curious too, like you must have a lot of knowledge about pollution. And do you know any kind of numbers or statistics or just kind of facts about how many people get killed or shorten their lives every year because of pollution or in different places and all that?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I do remember the impression that they made on me, which was they're very significant. I think I was running particular scenarios in China, and the impact on life expectancy of mostly pollution, mostly around cardiovascular health from pollution, was on the order of multiple years on average life expectancy that it was kind of reducing on the order of the entire Chinese population, which is insane. And that's just talking about life expectancy and health impacts. And of course, there's huge impacts in overall productivity, labor productivity. When the pollution is that bad, no one's going outside to be able to work. And those are huge losses as well. But they're very significant. I think those numbers are probably outdated at this point because even back 10 years ago now, and even then we were looking at data maybe another decade before, but it's probably multiple years of life expectancy lost just because of pollution, which is insane.
Okay, I have a multiple choice question for you then.
Mm-hmm.
So the cost from climate versus health, climate costs more than the health effects from pollution, or climate costs less, or it's approximately equal, maybe within 10% of each other?
So climate versus health. So the cost of climate as in the cost it takes to fix the climate, or what do you mean there?
Yeah, or I guess what we're paying for sea level rising, people moving, flooding, weather events, all that kind of stuff, which is pretty hard to
Mm-hmm.
get an exact number. You say like weather or something like that, but just if you just had to guess.
Yeah, I feel like if we're looking at today, or very much, we're not looking long term, we're just thinking today, I would say the health impacts are probably more significant. I think when you start adding them up, the climate impacts are going to be significantly higher. And that's kind of the big difference between pollution and carbon. Carbon's like, I think there's a bathtub analogy that people use where once CO2 is up in the air, or methane, these other carbon related greenhouse gases, they don't really abate by themselves. They continue building up. It's like you're trickling water into a bathtub and it just sits there into a bathtub. It doesn't really go down the drain. So in terms of these negative impacts, like what you're saying, sea level rise, migration, the impacts of increasing global temperatures, the impacts of more extreme weather events, that continues. Like whatever we emit today, hopefully in the future there'll be people doing carbon capture and the ways to get that carbon out of the atmosphere, but without that, that will continue to cause negative impacts for perpetuity, and that's very significant. For pollution, on the other side, it's much more of a shorter term issue. So sulfur dioxide, NOx, kind of the big ones, usually get dispersed or make their way out of the atmosphere on the order of a couple years. So it's a huge immediate health impact, but then it's not going to be there in 100 years the way that carbon will. So I think that's the way I see it. And having studied economics, so much of environmental economics is how much do you value the well-being of your children and grandchildren, because so much of climate is right now it has immediate impacts. We've been all seeing the crazy heat waves happening in Southeast Asia. We see the wildfires, we see the hurricane season. That's already happening, but a huge part of climate impact is that we're making the lives of our children and grandchildren significantly worse. And how much value do you give to that? And that's kind of a hard problem that economists are continually trying to figure out.
There could even be arguments that pollution lasts for a long time as far as the costs.
Mm.
Like you have, the immediate problems would be more like asthma and stuff like that. Then you have things like lung cancer. And I'm not sure, but like if you damage your lungs today, you're probably more likely to get cancer decades from now than you are tomorrow.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. And not all of that is captured in the data, right? There's so many negative impacts that might not be captured and you might not know. Yeah, that's very true.
And then I wonder if it damages DNA where it could affect your great grandchildren. I mean, I'm not sure about that with the DNA, but it's possible.
Hmm.
And then how many Einsteins is it killing,
Yeah. A lot of these, we try our best to get as good data as we can in order to estimate these things. But it becomes so hard and it's tough when decisions that we make today are based on that data. Like it's going to be this terrible later, so we got to do something about it today. I think, as far as I'm concerned, I'm very much willing to believe that we're underestimating all the terrible consequences because we just don't know. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm working on climate and I'm so passionate about getting the word out and getting more people into this industry. There's so many down the line impacts, like what you were saying, and these examples that we might not even know. And it seems like a no-brainer to me that you get as many people as possible, smart people as possible in here to try to fix this.
Yep. And then another thing too with climate. So what is it about? As the Earth got about 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer already? I think that's the number.
Yeah.
And so you got to multiply times 1.8 in America. So that's 2.16 degrees Fahrenheit and counting. So that's kind of crazy if you think about it. And some of this stuff with like the ice melting, that takes a while too. Kind of crazy to think about how we're heating up the earth. And then there's all the money involved in trying to deny this. And I hear some people saying that, oh, yeah, it's actually getting colder. You ever heard that one? Like it's actually getting colder. And then some people say, like, no, it's the sun that's getting hotter.
Yeah, I feel like that's a line that's been used. I actually remember a scene from The Inconvenient Truth or something where he was saying it's not the sun that's getting hotter, it's here's the, carbon parts per million, all these numbers that, are commonly used. And that came out 2 decades ago now, and people are still trying to use the same already kind of disproven lines. But it's kind of appealing to stick your head in the sand and pretend these big issues aren't happening in the world. It's kind of easy to do that or appealing to do that for some people versus facing some pretty hard facts.
Well, maybe it's a good idea to also put more focus on pollution just to capture a greater audience and more support than just everything being all about climate, which is, affecting the grandchildren and all that stuff. I mean, some people don't have kids.
Yeah. No, for sure.
But so let's see. So you first became involved in climate in first grade. So that's pretty cool. So what's this fancy Silicon Valley high school? It's so impressive.
Yeah, that was a funny interaction with your girlfriend. And I think in the Bay Area, it's fairly well known. I went to a high school called Henry M. Gunn High School. And it's actually a public school.
What was that again? Henry
M. Gunn.
Henry M. Gunn. Henry Gunn.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we call it Gunn High, Gunn. And
that's kind of crazy with all the shootings going on,
Yeah, but named after, I guess, the founder of the high school, Henry M. Gunn, and it's a public high school in Palo Alto. Fairly highly ranked and very good school, very inspirational teachers. I think I got a lot of my kind of curiosity and interest and, some of the decisions I took later in life, for example, studying economics in college, were because I had a really wonderful economics teacher in high school. But yeah, I think it was generally a really great experience. The school has gotten a little bit of a bad rep in recent years for being very stressful, very high pressure, which it is. And I think some of it is just by nature being in Palo Alto, being in a place where kids are expected to really excel and go on to Ivy League colleges and kind of do crazy things and already start doing research at Stanford in high school. So there is a lot of pressure. but I think it was also, it kind of opened my eyes in terms of what I could do as a teenager because I was surrounded by other people kind of wanting to do really cool things.
And I think the good thing is there's such an entrepreneurial spirit in Palo Alto and Silicon Valley as a whole. So I had a bit of that interest in climate sustainability from when I was quite young. I remember watching The Inconvenient Truth in fourth grade and being so impacted by it and wanting to do something about this. And in high school, I met and became great friends with my current co-founder, Natasha Allen. We were in the same year at Gunn. And both of us fell in love with the new technologies around solar and distributed solar, and I guess to an extent, solar and storage, which was kind of being developed, and the opportunity of this new technology to both be more sustainable and climate friendly, but also empower people without energy access. I think back then it was 1.2 billion people in the world without energy access. Now we're down to around 800 million, but still a huge number of people who do not have access to this very fundamental resource, right? If you don't have energy, there's a lot of economic opportunities you don't have. There's a lot of educational kind of health opportunities you don't have. You can't connect it to the internet, so you don't have access to a lot of information that we so depend on. And so I think it started with just very small solar lights, solar home systems, and then as the technology developed, became microgrids and things. And now that's a huge part of the US as well. You see, commercial and also residential solar and storage become much more mainstream. But, when we were in high school, we both kind of discovered this. I don't even remember where. I think we both found it. I think I took it to her. I was like, gosh, this thing is so cool. And little did we know that would end up kind of leading us for many years after.
That's so awesome. So kind of funny that your high school is where you met your most important connection, not Harvard.
Yeah.
So maybe that was more important.
Yeah. And I think actually we started working on solar related things in high school. We worked on a solar curriculum. Actually, you may find this kind of funny, sponsored by the SunPower Foundation. I think this was maybe 2010, 2011. And I remember the two of us sitting in her garage, pulling an all-nighter and like just chatting and talking about how we make activities. It's a solar curriculum for middle school and high school students in California to get them familiar with the technology. And we would go around the Bay Area with this curriculum and run like 1 or 2 day workshops in schools. And there's still photos of us. I can send some, and maybe they'll be fun to share with the podcast. And we were 15 thereabouts. And
so what you said, ninth grade.
Yeah.
So you were making SunPower curriculum in ninth grade. Were you working with the trainers at SunPower?
No, this is a school's. This wasn't for, installer contractors. This is for students. And I think we were targeting middle and high school students. And it's part of a program called 1 Million Students that the SunPower Foundation had sponsored. And we were creating those curriculums.
Is something still going on with that?
I don't think so. I think, that was long enough ago. I do help with various summer camps. There's cool solar summer camps that happen. I know there's one in Berkeley that I go and sit on the career panel every year. That is a little bit of, the way the program has evolved. I think they've turned it into less of a in-school 1 or 2 day thing into a summer camp program, which is so cool. I would have so loved it in, middle or high school. I think it's a 2-week thing and people go there. It's like a full summer camp, and then they end up building a solar water pump or a solar like mini car or something through the course of the 2 weeks, and it gets kids kind of hands-on familiar with this technology. I think that's what the program has evolved to be, and I know that summer camp is still happening.
And are you working with a summer camp right now?
I just go and help and support. So part of that summer camp is they host like a career panel of people who work in clean tech or clean tech adjacent. So I go and sit on that panel and give kids an idea of, the things that they could do.
What's the camp?
I'll look it up. Let me see.
That's pretty cool too, that you did your first startup in ninth grade. Not too many people did their first startup in high school.
It wasn't really a startup. I think this is more of a project. And yeah, I think it's funny calling it that or not. I think I like the idea of...
Sounds like some kind of Silicon Valley story.
I like the idea of thinking about it as I want to do this because I find this cool, starting in ninth grade, but I think we were working on the curriculums maybe 10th and 11th grade, where we think this is really cool. We think solar is really cool. We want more students to know about it. Let us build something to teach other students about it.
Well, that's how a lot of startups probably started, like Apple. There's like, this is cool, these computers, we play video games. And
Yeah. No, I like thinking about it in that way, which I think is maybe a result of being in an environment which focus on that. And it's not like building a startup is a big scary thing. You do all those things. It comes from a much more maybe a little naive, but very kind of bright-eyed way of like, this is cool, let's do it. We'll just take it one step at a time. And you do end up sometimes making it happen. So that was the perspective that Natasha and I had on it. And around the same time, we were also working on more international development and nonprofit side where we wanted to provide solar powered lights to communities, mostly in Southeast Asia, who were using kerosene lamps for illumination. And we said, kerosene, that's expensive. You have to keep buying kerosene. That's dangerous because people knock them over and they burn houses down. Let's give them solar powered lights instead so they can recharge them and use lights. So we ended up working on a couple projects, mostly in the Philippines for that as well in high school. And people are like, wow, you guys like built a little nonprofit or help build these nonprofit projects in high school. And from our perspective, it seemed cool. It seemed like a good idea. Let's figure out what it takes to do that.
And so is that still happening too? Like the lights?
Yeah, neither of us are that involved with it anymore, but the organization still exists. 1 Million Lights Philippines is still very much happening. A fairly large organization. Would shout out to everyone listening to this podcast to go check them out and support. They're still doing really cool work. And It's so cool to see that still going on.
Yeah, I've had a lot of connection with the Philippines. My daughter was born there, who's 9 years old right now. And I'm still teaching classes for Meralco, which is the big utility in the Manila area. So
Cool.
in fact, I have a class coming right up.
Cool. I should connect you with the 1 Million Lights Philippines people. Solar is like such a good fit for that part of the world because there's so many islands. You're not going to build centralized distribution and get distribution transmission to all the islands. So solar makes a ton of sense.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. Well, no wonder you got into Harvard. You were like starting all these businesses in high school, and they couldn't say no. So going to Harvard, that's pretty cool. I'm actually, for some reason, I don't know why, but I've been to Boston a bunch of times this year. I'm going in a couple of days too, teaching these classes and stuff like that. But I mean, everybody knows that Harvard's probably like the hardest school that there is to get into. So you've obviously been doing some things right. And do you notice that from going to Harvard, what's the big benefit? I mean, it's like one thing is people will go, wow, you went to Harvard. That's really difficult. That's where Obama went and all that kind of stuff. And then another thing would be making connections. And then, of course, there's the learning. You probably have like the best instructors because they all want to go there and things like that. One of my favorite YouTube videos is the guy Sasha Baron, Ali G, Borat, the Borat guy. He did like a commencement for the graduating class. And it was like one of the most funniest things I ever saw on YouTube. And he dressed up like this English rapper that is called Ali G, easier to pronounce that. And so that was pretty cool. But yeah, a lot of times when I'm in Boston teaching a class, I'll go over there near Harvard and have dinner. And I mean, it really rubs off all the smartness.
Yeah, I think I really loved the school. And I think, of course, the connections is great. The reputation is great. I really loved how, I guess, humble people were there, which is funny to think about it. But when you're there, there's thousands of people. I think each graduating class is maybe 1,500, 1,600 people. And everyone is so accomplished and so motivated and so smart. So it kind of almost keeps you humble in a way. Like everyone you meet has something incredible to offer. And I really like that environment. People are no longer posturing because there's no way you can posture, right? Like people are so accomplished. There's no way you're better than everyone else. And I think it takes that out of the equation or out of the environment in a way that I really liked when I was there. And I think the other thing about Harvard, I think maybe an extension to what I was saying about my experience in high school was you meet these really, really accomplished, really awesome, really intelligent people, and you actually get to just hang out with them and maybe grab a beer with them and chat and kind of sit in the yard, sit on the lawn with them, and you realize they're just normal people too. I think I took a seminar one of my years with Larry Summers, and he had us over to his house for brunch, and we just chatted. And he, obviously extremely accomplished, extremely smart, but was kind of a normal guy. So I think it opens up the world to you in a way that it makes these things less intimidating. I think, as a young person, I was afraid to go to my professor's office hours when I first went to Harvard. I was like, these are such, people that are put on a pedestal, and I don't want to waste their time. What if my questions aren't good enough for them? And by the end of my 4 years there, I realized that they really looked forward to having discussions with their even kind of freshman students or just figuring their way around. And I think that made a huge impact to me later. Of now I'm kind of less afraid to go and kind of seek out mentorship, kind of talk to people who have been in, for example, you who've been in the industry for so long and have know so much more about this than I do. But we have a great time just chatting. And I'm sure I can bring interesting ideas too, and interesting new ways of thinking about things. So I think that was my biggest takeaway from going to Harvard and what I'm kind of most thankful for.
And so you said that I have more experience, but I mean, you've been doing this since kindergarten, right? So
In a very slight way. I was mostly trying to learn how to read at that time.
and then you were mentioning like having dinner with Larry Summers. And so he was the United States Secretary of the Treasury under Clinton and president of Harvard. I guess that must have been when you were there.
No, that was before my time. Yeah, he was also president of the World Bank at some point. He has done so many things and has also had his fair share of controversies. But as an economist, and I was taking a class with him around different trade policies, talking about international trade, open borders or not. And as an economist, he's done amazing research on that.
Awesome. Cool. So you finished college and then now you have Illu. That's what your main thing is, what you're doing right now. Did you do other stuff in between or was it straight on to Illu?
No, I guess college was 8 years ago, so it's been a while. I spent some years doing investment banking. I was in New York working on financing large-scale energy infrastructure projects.
So that's how you made your billions. Okay. Trillions.
I wish. And they don't pay investment bankers that well anymore, unfortunately. But I spent some years there kind of learning the ropes. I felt like I didn't quite have the experience, at least in a professional setting, to go off and do my own thing yet. So I spent some years there, learned a lot about, energy infrastructure kind of industry, especially utility scale projects. And then joined Natasha, went over to Myanmar, and the two of us started a solar microgrid company there called Mipanya, which is a Burmese name for light bringer or electricity bringer.
So Myanmar is Burma?
Myanmar is Burma,
Yep.
goes by both names. And there's a big push right when we were going there to build up more energy infrastructure. There's still around 30 million people in Myanmar without access to electricity, and it has very little centralized power infrastructure and central grid. So there's a big push to kind of leapfrog into energy access through solar hybrid microgrids. So we were mostly working in the very south of the country, Tenantari area, and working on building microgrids there. We still have a field team, a local kind of country team there, and we built two of our own microgrids. These are, power entire village, so a couple hundred households, all the businesses in the village, the school, the monastery, the health clinic. And so we worked on two of those projects together. And then we also are contracted by some of the other development agencies to provide kind of services, ongoing service management of the microgrids that they had built up. So that was a really cool experience, learned so much from that. And I think that was the very kind of immediate step before that took us to Illu, which is what we're focusing on now. And it was just, when we're there building things, it was really hard to manage the complexity of getting these projects done and continuing to manage kind of a field team and make sure they know what to do, make sure that they're trained up and actually fully supported on the ground and also accountable for the work that they're doing. And we found that we needed kind of better tools to do that, which led us to kind of building our own thing.
Awesome. So you were out there managing teams, and were you like the EPC, like general contractor type of thing?
Yeah, so we were actually the full project developers. We also kind of financed and kind of designed and handled the full spectrum of the process. So not just the EPC side of things. And then even after kind of commissioning and the project went
Mhm.
live, continued to own and manage those two main projects that we delivered on. So definitely a lot of kind of design and engineering work there with the help of other subcontractors that we partnered with, but then the full project development process as well.
Great, great. Okay, and so then that led to Illu, and Illu is ILLU.works.
That's right.
That's how everybody can find it. And so let's get into it about Illu and tell us about Illu.
Yeah, so obviously we love solar and storage. We love all the cool technology coming into this sector. I think where Elu is mostly focusing on the US, but even now this industry is getting quite complicated, especially in California, people moving from solar into solar and storage. There's new codes and regulations that are coming out, so new compliance complexities. There's kind of EV charger, home electrification. There's a lot more components that are all being added to this, and that puts a big burden on installers and contractors, some of which are larger companies, but there's also smaller mom and pop companies, and these are people that need to perpetually learn new models and equipment that's coming into the market. They need to learn how to work with those. They need to learn how to be compliant with new codes and standards that are coming out and kind of changing. And we realized similar problem in Myanmar. We were managing a team and making sure they were all updated and knew what they were supposed to do. It's very hard to do that without particular kind of tools or real-time tools. I think right now the industry very much relies on lots of manuals, a lot of you just go and read the code, which is hard to decipher. There's not great guidance in the code. There's industry experts such as yourself that have a lot of great information, and you go to conferences and you present them and installers go and watch them, but that's not always the easiest thing to do, to try to make all these webinars and kind of listen to them. And so we're trying to simplify all of that in a digital manner that reduces all this complexity into following step by step on your mobile device that is related to the specific work each contractor installer needs to do on the ground at that time based on a specific project, a specific location they're in. And this way, it makes it much more easy to be compliant, to do the job the right way, to successfully commission a project the first time, and or fix any issues that occur. And we're doing this with a kind of web and mobile platform and working with both manufacturers to get the right information in, and also industry experts and trainers to get kind of the compliance best practice side in.
So would it be sort of like you get this app and it works with your smartphone, and you have like checklists and you're up there installing things, and it's like, did you screw this on and to this many foot-pounds and enter the amount of foot-pounds, and it kind of goes with the installation manual and all that kind of stuff. Is that sort of how it works?
Yeah, exactly. So it's taking the installation manual, which covers like every single instance of what you may have to do, and putting it into your phone, so easier to access, and making it step by step, only the things that are relevant to you, at that time based on the specific configuration that you're installing. And the other main thing is it helps with documentation at the same time. Like a manual just gives you information. You can't take photos or input things. It's not a form. We were combining the manual, the instructional side of things with kind of form documentation. So it's like when you get to step 5, when you're installing this or you've run a particular kind of test on this, record the voltage that you're seeing or take a photo of this, and that reporting information generates a report that you may have to submit to for a building permit or for the fire marshal, or just for kind of internal submission or for your customer. That all gets managed in the same way, so you're not going back to the office having to create this report later on. So trying to just make that easily accessible and streamlined.
Sounds really important, especially for somebody that's out there in the field under the bright sun. And where I am, it's pushing 100 degrees today, and you could get a little bit of loss of consciousness almost out there, and you have to be paying attention to not falling down, especially if you're in a high place, and not getting hurt and all that. So it seems like being super organized through your app that has all these different pathways that maybe, what would you call them, like decision trees, stuff like that,
Call them workflows.
workflows, things like that.
Mhm.
So that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about this too, because, obviously you do so much training, you provide this kind of information and resources, and it's such critical information. And we're trying to provide another pathway for this information to get to the people who need them in these kind of places as they're installing, reminders. So they're not trying to remember, like, a couple months back, I listened to this webinar that had this information. What was that again? What photos did I have to remember to take? What torque values or what spacing was required. But yeah, I'm curious to hear your take about the kind of additional complexity too. I know you had like you showed some of the large PowerPoints that you're so good at making, and especially the ones on the new code requirements that are kind of newly introduced. I love to hear if this kind of complexity, additional information, I'm sure it's been picking up for a couple years, but where do you see this trend going?
You mean as far as how complex it's going to be for all this kind of stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the code will obviously change, but most of the changes are just organizational, trying to make things more
Mm,
clear. But there are some different changes, and it does get a little bit difficult when you are working in different places and different states,
mm,
and they all have different versions of the code, and they can modify it and stuff like that. But one of the things that I kind of visualize that's going to be happening, that's going to be really technical and difficult and require a lot more workers and things to organize, are things like energy management systems, virtual power plants, things like that. And you will have to connect things together, measure the current with a CT, that's called a current transformer, sometimes current transducer. And then it's going to hook up to electronics. And then you're going to have wires running all over the place, going to different smart circuit breakers, smart loads, air conditioners that can turn off for 5 minutes here and there, electric vehicles that can send things in both directions, and then a grid that is kind of like that, but just on a bigger scale. And you don't want to put too much power, too much current through a power line. And in order to do that, you're going to have AI figuring out where to send things. I mean, we're going to maybe need something like, depends on your source, but in another 20 years, we might be running 20 times the amount of the energy out of these power plants. Of course, most of it's going to be solar by then, and solar only turns on at a certain time and all that. And I believe there's ways to use the same existing power lines that we have right now that are underutilized most of the time. And then we have these peak times when they might be overutilized. So we need to smooth all that out with this really super smart grid, figuring out how to turn down this and turn that up and charge the battery and discharge the battery and all those things. I mean, just if you took, for instance, your average house with a 200 amp service uses 5 amps on average, or less than
mm.
5 amps throughout the year. And that goes for our whole grid. It would be kind of similar to that. Another thing too is we have the technology, but we need to have the policy, and that makes it really difficult too. And then technically, how are we going to put this stuff together so we don't overload a wire? And we're going to need smart people installing these things. And so I imagine having different brands of things, and dishwashers coordinating with electric vehicles, with solar systems, with energy storage systems, and all that. And we're going to get to a point where we won't even need to upgrade the transformers, because even though we're using 4 times the energy, we're not going to be using as much power all at once, because we're going to be really smart with what we're doing. And in order to be really smart, we're going to need to be really smart with how we install these things, because we're going to be using your app, right?
Yeah.
And so there's all these different installation manuals and different products and how to coordinate all these things together. So we have a lot of work cut out for us, and we need a whole lot of super smart people. This is going to be, not just screwing bolts together, but it's going to be figuring out where this goes and where that goes. And sometimes some of the smarts, are going to need to be on site. But a lot of times, I think too, we don't have to be as smart on site if we can have like an app, like what you're talking about, telling us where to put things. And then you download it into there, and then it can determine how much current is going on a certain wire. And another thing too is people offsite could be looking through the video of the camera at certain times and trying to like help the person out there in the field. I know that there was a job that somebody that I knew installed it, and then he disappeared, and it was for a friend that I referred to him. And so I went out there myself yesterday, and I was up on a super hot roof, And it's like, what do you do? It's kind of funny too with me is like, I also do some consulting. And I've had people call me up, send me to other side of the world. I mean, almost literally like South Africa. And then they go, what do we do? And it's like, we call the manufacturer. And he's like, well, what did I call you for? What did I bring you all the way here for? And it's like, who knows better than the manufacturer, than any one person? It's like, there's no such thing as a photographic memory. We have to have photos. Maybe your phone has a photographic memory, not your brain.
Yeah.
And so we need to utilize the manufacturer. So that's really good too. Of what your app is doing is trying to coordinate together all of the different manufacturers and figuring out how to coordinate these things, how to make them work together. I mean, you can have a system where you're AC coupling and DC coupling at the same time, and you have solar edge inverter with DC coupling with the solar edge optimizers and AC coupling on the AC side with a microgrid interconnect device. I mean, all that stuff's happening right now. And then it's going to get way more complicated. Like probably each time you add something like that, it's going to be double the complexity. So you do it 2 times, you got 4 times the complexity. So it's going to be a lot more complex. And we're going to be able to do that with having different tools that are just more than one smart guy that holds everybody hostage.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, these stories about such relevant points around both the manufacturer side. On the manufacturer side, it might be like one of their tech support agents has seen this before and knows how to deal with this, but how do you get a lot of that know-how stored in a kind of clearly followable way digitally that they can then send? Like, how great would it be if for the South Africa project, they were using Illu and then they called the manufacturer, says, we have this problem. And they're like, well, we have the right Illu workflow for it, sends it to their mobile phone, and all, whoever they're working with, or even the owner of the system, if they're not doing anything risky, goes around and takes photos and checks all the settings and walks through how to fix that already. It would save so much time and make that process so much easier. Or even when you're kind of being flown over there, if the manufacturer already has that or is using Yulu, is using this to support any of these service calls or kind of service tickets, it just makes that a lot easier than trying to troubleshoot everything over the phone, being like, can you send me a photo of this? What does this say? What is that? And then you can just kind of standardize the process of kind of collecting that information and fixing it. That's also the other thing that we've really found in Myanmar is it's for us to build up more of these systems and projects on the ground. We need local people to be able to do it. You can't always be flying American engineers or European engineers to Myanmar to do everything. So you need people
I'll
locally.
go. It'll be fun. Sounds like fun. Yeah.
Yeah. But not for every one of these if you're trying to build, 10,000 of these. But it's much easier if you can have someone who's kind of monitoring it live and supporting it live. But then you have the specific procedure that needs to be followed by someone local. And maybe they're an electrician, they're not a solar technician, but they're familiar with, they've worked on other electrical projects before, and they can just follow Elu workflow to install a specific inverter or set that up. Of course, also, with some support, but it just makes this kind of rollout much easier to do, whether that's in Myanmar or low income communities in Los Angeles has the same issue, right? Or anywhere else that don't already have the skilled people to go and do it without any support. We're just, giving them a little bit of a leg up.
So it sounds like with Elu, you're making life easier for both sides, the installer and the manufacturer. And so the manufacturer can have less costs associated with tech support, and maybe they could even use the app to help direct the person in the field that's doing stuff. And then if they have a brand new tech support person, they could also learn from the app. And then, of course, obviously from the installer, you get employee turnover and stuff like that. And there's some new product and they're out there trying to figure out what to do. And it could almost perhaps troubleshoot in certain cases. I mean, there's always going to be a need for really good troubleshooters, but you can't always get a whole lot of real good troubleshooters. And so it sounds like a really good tool for those people.
Yeah, say you have 10 cases, 2 of them are going to be really difficult. 8 of them might be, par for the course. Hopefully, Elu can help with those 8. And your really good troubleshooters can focus on the ones where they're really needed. So trying to help with that prioritization.
Yeah, like when I was just up on that roof yesterday. So the first thing I do is I get up there and I open up everything and I get on the phone and I have to wait for somebody to pick up the phone. And then I push the button, they call me back. And the guy was really nice. His name was Tim. And then what he did probably could have been done by something like an app. He was actually a new person. He wasn't the most experienced, but it was like the Ethernet wasn't working. And so then we're like, oh, let's check to see if we could do cellular. And then he's like looking things up and he's like, oh, your system doesn't already come with that. Let's see if we can do Wi-Fi. And then he's telling me Wi-Fi passwords and all that kind of stuff. So that would have been nice if I just had an app and it just, different, do you want to hook up with this or that? And here's the password, if that's to give me a password and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Yeah, we have a long way to go. We're looking for partners, both on the manufacturer side and on the installer side. So to whoever is listening, if you're interested, you have thoughts, want to support, have particular use cases or even stories where this could become helpful, please reach out.
So there you go. There you hear it. You manufacturers and installers out there, give Sierra Fan a call. Check out Illu, make your life easier. Does that sound kind of like a good commercial for you?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Let's see, is there anything else that you want to talk about? Or we could always have another conversation down the road sometime too.
No, I think this is great. We're coming up on an hour, I guess. So I love how wide-ranging this conversation was, and I had a really good time.
Yeah, that's kind of why it's good not to plan, because then you could have more fun, have it be more natural instead of have like a list of things that we have to talk about. So yeah, thanks so much, Sierra Fan. And where can people find you? Where do you want to send people?
Yeah, please check out our website. It's www.illu.works, WORKS. You'll be able to find information about our app, how to sign up, how to contact us, help desk, lots of cool videos there. We're also very active on LinkedIn, so just look up Illu there as well, or connect with me directly on LinkedIn, Sierra Fan.
Yeah, and another thing that I thought was kind of funny is right before I met you in person, we've had a couple of conversations, and it was at the NorCal Solar 50th birthday party. And then that same exact day, I heard you were on Suncast. And so that's Nico Johnson's podcast. So that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Kind of a coincidence,
Yeah.
So great. All right. Thanks so much, Sierra Fan of Illu.works. And thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To learn more, go to Solar, SEAN, that's solarshawn.com, and get yourself NABCET certified.